started with a mortgage crisis, a home loan crisis. But it then became a bigger problem because there was so much money pumped into the market, money which was of very dubious origin. You had people monetizing assets which did not have the value that they were monetized at. Assets that were worthless actually. And at some stage, when all this goes on and on and on, and it becomes intoxicating, and every man jack in the world is investing in something or the other. They were either investing in homes or they were investing in these scraps of paper. At some stage, they should have been regulated. What you see here is the total absence of regulation in the American economic sector. It is something for which the United States should be held culpable. Their banks started collapsing, and their financial institutions started collapsing. They were, as the word goes, over-leveraged. They had pumped in far too much money into the market to people who had no capacity whatsoever to give back any of this or to pay the loans. So that became the origin of the global collapse. And that is known as the crash. And people were terrified. At that time I lived in Abu Dhabi. I was ambassador in Abu Dhabi. You saw Dubai wilt in front of your eyes. Because Dubai had a property boom of its own. It also gave large sums of money to people who in 10 lifetimes would not have paid back. They were investing in properties worth millions of dollars when their salary was not commensurate with this. And that whole boom of Dubai became now, and there were many people pumping money into projects that had not yet taken shape. Architects had not even completed drawings. What the banks used to do, they would give you the loan freely, but they would at the same time take from you post-dated checks. And in the UAE, if a check bounced at any time, you were deemed to have committed a criminal offense. Several thousand people found themselves in prison in the UAE because their checks had bounced. It's a small side story. The main story is still in the United States. And therefore the president called for the G20 to become a bigger entity at more senior level. I should have mentioned that as the G20 finance ministers got together, the selection of countries that should constitute the G20 was completely arbitrary. Two people at middle level, one German and one American, sat together in one room and went through country by country, had some figures with them, said this one is in, this one is out, this one is in, this one is out, this one is in, this is out. So it's a very, very arbitrary way of bringing countries in. And there were even at that time complaints saying, how did you bring in Argentina and not Colombia? And how did you leave out Spain, which has got a bigger economy than Italy or something like that? So the point is, there was arbitrariness in the constitution of G20 from the beginning, and that has continued. You had therefore summit meetings that started in 2009 and 2010. You find that these summit meetings did create a sufficiently broad consensus among the participants which were able to address this global crisis. Though the crisis may have come from the United States, let us be very clear, every part of the world was affected by it. India was also affected, though much less, because our engagement with the global economy was far less than others. So India was smiling at a time where everyone else was hurt. And people said that, look, it's a good thing we have got a closed economy and we don't allow anyone else to participate as actively as they should. So India was to some extent protected. but not entirely, because we were still dependent on people. For example, India used to provide a very large number of people who went abroad for employment. You had professionals and technicians and labor. And there were great fears at that time that Indians who were working in the Gulf would be victimized by this collapse of the regional economy because of the collapse of the global economy, and that 500,000 or so Indians would find themselves returning home. It did not happen. The oil prices, as you know, oil is a fuel. It fuels the global economy. As the global economy collapses, the demand for oil goes down. As the demand for oil goes down, the producers are affected. And therefore, prices started going down. I remember that period, it was $100, 100 became 80, 70, 60, 50, 30, and as they reached 30, it started going up again. So there was a demand for oil in the regional economy. Qatar started producing real estate, and Abu Dhabi and Saudi Arabia. Qatar, Saudi Arabia and Abu Dhabi, which were not immediately affected, poured money into constructive activity in their own country, and therefore 200,000 Indians lost their jobs in the UAE and returned, but there was no crisis in Kerala or in southern India because many of them came back and found jobs in Abu Dhabi, Qatar and the UAE, and Qatar and Saudi Arabia. Do recall here that this was, at that time, many of you will remember, governments intervened very strongly to protect national banks. Because if those, the word used was too big to fail. If those major banks in the world had collapsed, we would have gone into deep depression, worse than what we had experienced in 1929. And there were fears of that. We used to read articles every day giving you a very negative views about what is going to happen in future. But we were saved. It is said that this G20 meetings at that time, and I'm happy to tell you, our Prime Minister, Dr. Manmohan Singh, was regarded as a very major voice of sanity at that time. He was the best economist among all those people who gathered. He had been a former finance minister, and I remember Bush, there was a story that Bush told him, Mr. Prime Minister, I would love to have you in my cabinet and advising me to see through this crisis. Be that as it may, he was considered a very important voice, advising other governments about how they could handle this crisis. And that happened. They did what is called quantitative easing. Governments pumped money into companies, even private companies, so that, and banks, so that they would not fail. And because there was a run on the demand, because people were desperate, they wanted their savings back. Millions of people lost their homes because they didn't have the capacity to pay the loan, etc. It is in this background that you find the summits that have taken place, and since 2011, these summits are annual summits. Besides the meetings at summit level, through the year, you also find meetings of other ministers taking place from time to time, depending on issues. And I pointed out over here, you have meetings of trade ministers, agriculture ministers, labor ministers, and even tourism ministers. Some few years ago, it was recognized that tourism could be a very lucrative economic activity, and that this is something that the world at large could take a look at. We also had from the beginning not just members meeting together. Each member would invite, not each member, each president would invite certain other entities. Either they were organizations and institutions or individual countries whose presidents would be there as observers. This is how the presidency moves. You have all the members divided into 5 groups, and the presidency moves from group to group. So it's an annual exercise. Within the group, you can negotiate when you will become the president. In the case of India, we thought that we would become the president in 2022. 2022 was the 75th anniversary of our freedom and the beginning of Amrut Kal. So there was a feeling that this would be a good year. But there was another consideration. I'm going to say this, what I read, that 2023 had one advantage which 2022 did not have. It's just a few months away. The summit is in September and you have national elections in May next year. So it was felt that even if you celebrate the commencement of Amrut Kal in 2022, you are still a year and a half away from election. Might as well do the election a year later. And that is how we got the presidency in 2023. How it functions, there is to maintain continuity, we have the concept of the Troika. The Troika is the previous president, the present president, and the next president. So they work together and they are able to ensure that the agenda of one side is familiar to the The G20 functions through working groups. Working groups are gathering from officials of different member countries who sit together, develop the agenda, which they then make available to the summit. You also have the host country putting together what are called engagement groups. Engagement groups are not government entities. They are entities from non-government sources. They give you reports, concerns. You have activist groups concerned with climate change. You have other engagement groups connected with education, employment, youth services, women, etc. So you have today in India this buzz that I mentioned, the buzz around G20 is the proliferation of working groups meeting together, and you have engagement groups meeting together, and you have a large number of activities taking place all over. And that is why you get confused, like I got confused as to who won the best actor award. Was it the elephant or was it Brendan Fraser looking like an elephant? Before every meeting, the summit takes place in September, and the presidency ends at the end of November. And the 1st December, the next president takes over for 1 year. You have a series of preparatory meetings. These series of preparatory, there are two tracks that through which G20 functions. One is the finance track that recalls to you the earlier G20 meeting of ministers and central bank governors that still remains in place, and that is what they deal with. Also, the themes that they tackle also are broadly similar. The global economy, growth, finance, green finance, and also now anti-terror finance. The other one, that is the one that is the broader entity that brings together senior officials. Each country has one official called a Sherpa. So you have a Sherpa meeting, and they deal with all the other issues that animate the G20. And those issues are all there in front of you: trade, investment, agriculture, food, health, etc. Which are the engagement groups which are happening even as I speak to you: business, labor, women, youth, etc. So we have think tanks. You therefore have your own university is part of what they call U20, gatherings of academics of different kinds, meeting at different platforms, coming up with ideas that feed into the broader agenda of G20. You also have W20 dealing with women's issues, and you have therefore, there is no shortage of abbreviations, and it could be easily quite confusing. Some of the issues that have been dealt with, if you look at these issues, there is a consistent pattern. There are nothing that is suddenly thrown up on one particular summit. There is a continuum. For example, I put down from 2016 onwards, China talked about growth, talked about climate change, avoiding degradation, and promoting cooperation among South-South countries. migration, digitization, women. Argentina talked about employment, infrastructure development, and food security. Well before the Ukraine war, Japan talked about innovation, blue economy. All of these you will see are part of the present day scenario. All issues have been discussed in the past. From time to time, certain issues had a certain focus, primarily because they were urgent in that context. But the topics themselves have broadly remained the same. Saudi Arabia was a virtual summit, and it looked at, again, safeguarding the planet, empowering people, that is employment, making education and employment, and shaping new frontiers that refers to technology. Italy, because Italian summit took place in the context of the pandemic, so it talked about economic recovery, but did not ignore global warming and climate, and also spoke about health in terms of access to vaccines. You will recall that Italy was considered one of the countries that mishandled the pandemic quite seriously. Indonesia, which happened just last year, you see again global health architecture, technology, and sustainable energy. So you will see that there is a broad consistency, a continuum with regard to issues tackled earlier. And this brings me now to the Indian presidency. The Indian presidency is a source of extraordinary national excitement. It appears as if something very, very major is taking place, and that this is somehow India's glorious moment. Absent in this discourse is any reference to the 20 years that have already gone earlier, and I have shown you, we have also discussed at various summits various things. Overwhelmingly, it would appear that it is an attempt by the leadership to bring the people as partners and role players in this tamasha, in this theater that is G20 today. We have the logo. Look at the logo. The logo is inspired by our flag. It looks at the flag, the colors of the flag, and it shows the planet Earth very safely handled by the lotus. The lotus is a flower so beautiful, but it flourishes in challenging circumstances. Very often in dirty ponds, etc., you find the lotus. So it is a very symbolic act. Prime Minister's quote is very clear that it is the presidency promotes universal sense of oneness, that we are all one earth, one family, one future. This is the slogan that we have adopted, and this of course in Sanskrit translates into Vasudeva Kutumbakam. But Prime Minister has also added one more abbreviation, and that abbreviation is LIFE. Lifestyle for environment. So there is this unity or oneness which could be a socio-political message. There is also an environmental message that the Prime Minister has given, that it refers to life as lifestyle. That is, you must have each of us in his or her personal capacity, and all of us together in the national capacity must lead a lifestyle that ensures the world's ecology is sustainable. Prime Minister has also talked about an approach which is mentioned in many different posters. Inclusive, ambitious, decisive, and action-oriented. Qualities that are very closely associated with the PM's whole approach to governance itself, and therefore, not surprisingly, finds a mention at this this summit of global significance. Our posters also speak of India, the mother of democracy. So we are not just, our significance in this leadership is that we have the mother, that is democracy, originated in India. And therefore, we are well placed. We are not just democratic, consensus building, etc., We are also inclusive, ambitious, decisive, and active. India is therefore another slogan: leader, solution provider, consensus builder. So this is the intoxication that animates us, gives us a sense of extraordinary excitement, gives us a sense of partnership, gives us a sense of being part of something far bigger than us. And this is the moment of national glory that we have awaited for all these years. Now I must bring you down to earth. The joy, the excitement, the intoxication, nasha. In what context is this meeting taking place? Are these meetings taking place? This year-long presidency of India that will culminate in the summit in September, the Ukraine war. So you have the world very deeply divided. Just as we talk about one earth, one people, one all that world unity is challenged fundamentally by this divide in the world between the Western powers seeking to retain their hegemony and the other powers, the rising powers of Russia and China. This, therefore, this divide, this binary, referred to very often as the new Cold War, this is the one that defines global affairs today, and therefore becomes a serious challenge to maintaining G20 unity and achieving consensus. What is the West doing as I speak to you? Wanting to gather more and more developing countries within the entire platform of people who support the Western agenda. They are very clear that they will not allow any significant change in the global order. The West-led global order has to remain in place. There is not going to be any mutation in this regard. This impacts on the G20 because, as I had mentioned to you, G7 never gave up their superior position. G20 was never a platform where everyone was equal. To the extent the rest of the countries could support the broad G7 agenda, so be it, and they went along with a broad consensus on joint statements. If it doesn't serve their purpose, they are not going to associate themselves with anything that calls for them to accommodate other people's interests. Not happening, not happening. The other thing that is happening is the whole series of crises separate from the Ukraine war. I need hardly mention to you, but you know all of them. The health crisis. The health crisis still with us, not going anywhere. So very bad news that there is a spread of COVID all over again in India. We don't know which way it will go. Will it be as benign as the third wave, or will it be virulent? We don't know. Economic crisis got aggravated by the pandemic. We've not recovered globally or nationally. We don't know what the outlook is. There is a great sense of uncertainty with regard to the trajectory of global economic and therefore of national economics as well. And yet the world is desperately looking at green transition. India has a group of countries has said 2050, European Union has said 2050, they will achieve zero emission, China has 2060, and India has said 2070. Green transition has only one issue, and one issue is the primary: who is going to fund it? You are asking countries, particularly developing countries, to shift away from the fuels with which they are familiar and to which they have adjusted their economies into green fuels that are extraordinarily expensive in themselves and require an alternative infrastructure. A simple item like green vehicles now requires, the electric vehicles requires you not only to reinvent the manufacture of car vehicles, you are required to have all over the country, not petrol pumps, but you need the way you can recharge the battery of your motor car. And you have to give up on these petrol pumps by 2070, zero commission. Look at the investment. This is just one item. Look at the investments that are called upon as you shift away from coal, oil and gas into something else. We don't know else. And then there are technological changes. We are in the throes of extraordinary changes of the kind we do not know as yet, nor do we know the implications of those. I mentioned to you that large numbers of people in the West got unemployed because they did not have the requisite qualifications. They were not professionally qualified. As the ramifications of technological change now make themselves felt more intensely in different parts of the world, it will not just be a Western problem. It will be a problem that will impact all of us. Many of the jobs that are now commonplace today quite likely will disappear. And we don't know which those jobs are and what we should train for. This is the impact of technological changes that are staring before. This is the background within which this extraordinary adventure called G20 presidency is taking place. What has India said so far? I have looked at this spokesperson and looked at a lot of literature coming from official sources, and I have put down systematically everything that different people have said. Take a look at this agenda. I don't think there is a single point here that has not been discussed before. This is the most important thing. All of that. Sustainable development, environment, digital, women-led, multilateral, reform of multilateral institutions. It's a very old topic. Global food security, global health. The one topic that is truly the contribution of the Indian presidency and which should capture our imagination is that India expects to become the voice of the global south. Let us look at some of the things that have happened so far. Who have we invited? There are the perennial Spain, etc. But we have invited neighbor Bangladesh, Singapore, Mauritius, Nigeria. Nigeria is an important country in Africa. Egypt, Oman, and UAE are the three West Asian countries. We've had the meeting of the development working group at official level already taken place. This is Mr. Amitabh Khan, who is the Sherpa from the Indian side. We've had a meeting of the least developed countries already taking place. We've had a meeting of the disaster risk reduction working group already taking place. We had the meeting of the startup engagement group. And startup, as you know, is a very major buzz coming from India. So startup. The way to achieve economic growth, the way to harness technological achievement is to have young people not looking for jobs, but looking at setting up small startups of their own, which they can then be self-employed and contribute to the national interest as well. Some of the things that we have done so far, this is an Indian buzzword, again, reformed multilateralism. We believe in the transnational engagement, we believe in multilateral platforms, but we insist and demand that these existing multilateral platforms should be fundamentally repaired, should be reformed, should be transformed, so that they become more effective platforms for matters that agitate us. So we use this word, reformed multilateralism. And this word has been used, our Sherpa used this word, fractured geopolitical architecture. We are living in that, reflecting the divide over the Ukraine war. But we also have the problem of the pandemic and financial change. We have a series of engagements that we are already part of. These are quotations that have come from our people. We recognize that there are issues of health and issues of climate that cannot be handled by individual countries, and that we need to reform global institutions to make them effective platforms for global achievement. We are also very actively involved with digital innovation. This meeting has already taken place. It took place very recently in December. We are looking, this is also part of giving support to startups. But technology is today affecting every aspect of life, agriculture, health, education, etc. We want all our young people to be technologically trained. It doesn't matter what your subject is, you must know the technology. As you remember, as we have been through all this, my own generation came face to face with technology when you had the innovation of the mobile phone, which is completely something that you have been born with. But all of us need to master these technologies in order to find our space into whichever specialization that we have gone into, whether it is education or it is finance or it is development, agriculture, health or what have you. So this is an important point, but the message coming from here is India wishes everyone to be technologically qualified. We are also talking about energy transition. India has announced that by 2070, if all goes well, we should have zero carbon emissions. But things are not going right, and I thought it's only fair to tell you. At the meeting that we had in Bangalore in February, the Power Secretary made it very clear that to achieve green transition, so that we can reach our target of zero emission, India needs from today till 2070, over the next 50 years, India needs $10 trillion. That's a warning to us. $10 trillion, frankly, is huge money. Our petroleum minister at the same conference said, India's clean energy target needs to be weighed against the country's growing economy and rising energy requirements. The signal that has come from this meeting and then highlighted by the expert I have quoted here, India needs fossil fuels to keep the lights burning. So whatever is happening, be very clear over here that energy transition of the kind that is touted in various platforms is not happening. Not with the speed with which we would like, because it is far too expensive. And the messages are very clear, and I have quoted them in front of you. Healthcare. India is desperately looking at cooperation. India's Prime Minister pointed out that the pandemic showed two trends. Number one, that yes, there was cooperation in developing the vaccine. But no, there was no cooperation whatsoever in the distribution of the vaccine. Overwhelmingly, affluent countries had first access to the vaccine, and most of the poor countries in Africa and Latin America had no access to the vaccine at all. The statistics are alarming. But all of us know from the experience of the pandemic that this pandemic respects no borders. And while the approach of countries is nationalistic, the scourge is transnational. How do you build this gap? How do you bridge this gap? India has come up with the idea of ACT accelerator. India is a world leader in having the best possible abbreviations. Nobody can challenge us on that. So you have access to COVID-19 tools. Accelerator is called ACT accelerator. I wish abbreviations would really be the magic wand and that would transform everything. The play on words is what we are good at. Now, where are we looking at? We've asked for ACT accelerator to cover the entire range of healthcare, of the diagnosis, therapy, vaccine, etc. And we want a permanent institution relating to transnational health that will particularly look after the interests of the global south. So this is India's desire, but it's not clear where it is actually going to go. The most interesting thing that happened did not get the attention that it deserved is that India wishes to be the voice of the global South. The full title was Voice of the Global South for Human-Centric Development. This was a virtual summit, almost entirely ignored in India. It happened in January. It was attended, it's a virtual summit, attended by 125 countries. That means there is an extraordinary allure with regard to this particular initiative. We talked about unity of voice and unity of purpose. Prime Minister Modi came up with his 4 R's. As I said, we are outstanding world leaders in abbreviations. And here is our leader with the 4 R's: respond, recognize, respect, and reform. You know what he's referring to. He also in his speech to this group actually gave out certain concrete contributions from India, that we are going to provide medical support if there is any need anywhere. We will be looking after natural disasters, and as you know, we responded so robustly both in Turkey as well as in Syria as part of it. We are supporting research and development. We are going to share what we have achieved in space technology and nuclear energy. We are providing larger numbers of scholarships, and we are also going to train young diplomats in Indian institutions. So here is, keep this in mind, because to my mind, this is the most significant achievement. Much less so is the finance ministers meeting. It took place in Bangalore in February. There was a lot of talk, very little substance, and finally we got no joint statement. The issue of Ukraine came in the way, and therefore no joint statement emerged. China and Russia made it very clear that even the language used in Bali, which they had agreed to a year ago, is not acceptable to them. Things have changed on the ground. The West has provided huge quantities of sophisticated weaponry to Ukraine, and therefore the scenario has changed. And yet, the other issues that should have been addressed more seriously, debt, for example, the American agenda is very clear. It is China that has to reduce the debt that it has in terms of what it has paid to developing countries. China says we are willing to do that, but World Bank and IMF must also come on board. US has not responded positively, and the matter has just died away, leading to bilateral arrangements. India was very keen that we should look at cryptocurrency, and that absence of global initiatives relating to cryptocurrency could harm global economies. The collapse of some of the banks in the West would suggest to you that this remains a real topic, a genuine challenge, because we know so little about it, and it is nearly unregulated as of now. The foreign ministers' meeting also ended in fiasco. We had very little achievement. We had already thought it would be a dialogue of the deaf. An article had already appeared in this regard. Things had happened in the past to divide the international community. China had come up with its own plan for Ukraine, and then India was therefore the Western powers used this platform to make a robust effort to co-opt India into their partnership. And therefore you had the focus on Quad rather than on anything cooperative over here. What you find is the Saudi-Iran agreement indicates once and for all, very dramatically, that China is going to be a major role player in international affairs. That means what the Americans have worried about, retaining hegemonic control over the trajectory of global councils, is now already palpably challenged right in front of their eyes. I'm going to share with you some thoughts, and these are personal views, and it is up to you to think through what they mean to you. It seems to me that the G20 is incapable of producing any concrete results whatsoever. It had emerged from two crises. first the currency crisis of the 1990s, and then the global finance crisis of 2007-2008. At that time, the G7 desperately needed participation, consultation, and support of developing countries. And it worked for a certain while. But now when there is a perceived challenge to Western hegemony, the G7 has closed doors. They have come back together. Their understanding and assessment of the world order is that they need to defend their own interests and they no longer need to build consensus with the other developing countries. This is the message that has come to me so far in the last few months. They would rather not have any statement unless they got the chance to criticize Russia and China in some shape or form. That means the international agenda is being compromised, diluted, and left out because the Western political agenda, which is not part of G20, until that is served, they are not going to look at. I therefore believe that the G7 is likely to bother less about G20 than it might have done earlier. But this reaffirms to me what I had said to you, that G7 came on board only to the extent the G20 was useful to their interests. I therefore have put down what could become issues of concern. Who are members of G20? Who made them the members? By what right are they sitting over there and calling themselves the most important platform in the world? So there are questions about the membership of G20. There is no rotating membership. So all the members are permanent. There is no regional representation. I pointed out Africa has only one member. 54 countries is only one member. Latin America has pick and choose certain countries. And very little, the factual position is, and my research has confirmed that, to what extent were developing countries influential in the deliberations of the G7 up to now? And that's it is also, and here I have put down, this is, the G20 has no enforcement capacity. It reflects conversations that take place in the best of times, cannot enforce anything. Countries use it to see what we can gain from it, and that is the end of the conversation. What does all this mean for India, ladies and gentlemen? For me, the single most important message that has come. I am a skeptic with regard to the future of the G20. As far as India is concerned, I read an article just before coming here that India hopes to use this to project its soft power, its culture, heritage, beautiful monuments, and promote tourism. There is no mention in that influencing the agenda of G20 because realistically there is no hope for that. The overwhelming aspect of what you are seeing around you is domestic. And it is overwhelmingly addressed to the domestic constituency. Realistically, that is the case, and we leave it at that. What is therefore to emerge from this? And I am plucking up my courage to say something. It should be the India now. G20 is day before. I have used this term. It is day before yesterday's news. It is past its use by date. We therefore, the world calls for a new platform, a platform of genuine cooperation. We've had these mantras before. South-South cooperation is a mantra I grew up with. Before that, we had non-aligned movement, then South-South cooperation, and now we are talking about voice of the global South. The challenge has not changed, so the terminologies have. And I think if India seeks to remain relevant in the global dialogue and global discourse, we need to come up with a big idea. An idea that goes beyond domestic compulsion and the electoral fortunes of our leadership. It should be a big idea that reflects India's interest over a longer period of time. India needs a vision, and it is this vision that I'm offering before you. A successor, so many years later, after the end of the Cold War, so a successor to the idea of the non-aligned movement, an idea of further pursuing the voice, further pursuing South-South cooperation. There is a problem, ladies and gentlemen. The discourse that emerges from Delhi is the focus on great power status. That as if India's destiny lies in becoming a great power. None of the parameters that define our country indicate that we are qualified just yet. We have a long way to go. I would go further and challenge the concept fundamentally. What is this great power business that you want? You want to sit with all these Western nations and dominate the rest of the world? Firstly, very objectively, no Western nation is going to call you. If they deal with you, it is as a subordinate who can be useful to them. I would suggest to you young people, take a fresh look where you want your country to go. This business of great power, हम जाके बैठेंगे, Security Council में हम बैठेंगे, we will. Security Council is a defunct organization, non-functional organization. That is not a place for India. India has a tradition. It is associated with Nehru, but it is not confined to Nehru. It is an idea that came from India, and it has been the most significant contribution that we made to world affairs. But I would say this, and I said this in an interview yesterday, it has to be sincere and it needs to be credible. You have to go, if you want to be the voice of the global South, you have other players also seeking to play that same role. You have China, for example, very active in this regard. I made the point yesterday that the South is big enough to accommodate many countries if they are sincere and if they are credible. And that is what I have to say to you, that don't get into this great power business. I therefore leave the last thought with you. Where do you want India to be in the coming scenario? It is very clear that the West is going to compete ruthlessly to retain their hegemony. India has stood very firmly against hegemony, and it has spoken in favor of the new world order. These days, for the last few years, you don't hear this from India anymore. The hints that you get is more and more, we are more comfortable with sitting as a subordinate role player in Western councils. Quad is being mentioned in this regard. I do, you do, all of that is rubbish. India's interests lie here with the South. India's destiny lies with the South, and that is where we need to be. What we don't need is to sit, you remember Wellesley had this subsidiary alliance. He made you an alliance, but also ensured that you were a junior partner in that alliance. We don't need that era to come back again. I also use the word credible. Credible is a very important concept. You have to go beyond the exuberance of your rhetoric, where you keep on saying what a great people we are, what a great history we had, everybody loves us, we are world leaders, we are doing this has saved, effective, etc. Vasudeva Kutumbakam, we believe in one nation, one people, one earth, etc. Vasudeva Kutumbakam has to be inclusive at home before it can be in the world.
Thank you very much for bringing such a wonderful and realistic approach to G20, what India is looking for. So now the floor is open and go into the questions. We'll have 4-5 questions together. Later we can go on.
Greetings, sir. This is Aditya Karthik from First Year Politics and International Relations. Thank you for this today's insightful lecture. I have two questions, sir. So first is, as you have been the ambassador to Saudi Arabia, Oman, and the UAE, what is your assessment of the future of India's engagement with West Asia, and what are some of the key opportunities and challenges in this relationship? My second question is regarding G20. Yes. My second question is regarding India's G20 presidency. How will India work to ensure that the voices and perspectives of developing countries will be represented during its G20 presidency? Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon, sir. I am Suraj from South Asian Studies. I have three questions. First question is about Abraham Accords, in which countries like UAE and Bahrain are recognizing the sovereignty of Israel, and how it will affect the Palestinian issue. And the second question is like how important is how important is to create international institutions against current institutions like IMF and World Bank, in where power lies with the West, and what is the role of India in that? Sir, and my third question is, can India and China ever come together? Like we are ideologically contrasting, where India calls itself as mother of democracy and China which is despotic. Thank you, sir.
Yes, good afternoon, sir, and thank you so much for such an enriching lecture. This is Polomi Mondol from South Asian Studies. I have two questions, sir. First is regarding the last slide where you talked about proposing an alternate model or saying like a successor to the G20 summit. So my question is that we have seen that if there is a successor model and there are other developing countries who are involved, like for instance the G77 or NIEO, we have seen even there is no consensus within the developing countries. So what do you propose in that cases? Because even if we have a lot of countries,